All right, hello everyone. Welcome to the 6th installment of the series of virtual brown bag webcasts that are related to the Curriculum Standards Panel brought to you by the National CyberWatch Center. Today's topic is Enterprise Infrastructure Hardening Strategy. My name is David Toby. I'm the Director of Research and Assessments with the National CyberWatch Center. In this role, I facilitate the developing national standards for the design of competency-based mastery learning curriculum that is being developed by the Curriculum Standards Panels. Today's speaker, Terrence Campbell, is a chair of the topic area working group that is focused on curriculum related to the identity domain in the NIST framework. Before we begin, you need to be aware that this session is being recorded and anything spoken or shared on screen by the host or presenter or any of the participants will be part of the recording. If you object to being recorded, you should either not speak during the session or you may simply disconnect from the session altogether. All participants have been placed on mute, and if you wish to ask a question or make a comment during the session, please use the chat window to post questions or comments. We will address all your questions at the end of the presentation. Now let's get started. Let me introduce our speaker for today, Terrence Campbell. Mr. Campbell is a published 30-plus year informatics and information systems security practitioner scholar that has assisted in managing enterprise-level security, cyber, human, and physical, across several critical infrastructure sectors. Mr. Campbell has also over 17 years of experience integrating information system security principles into informatics frameworks in ways that simultaneously harden cyber infrastructure and enhance community health. As part of a U.S. Department of Labor grant, Mr. Campbell leads the development of the Wayne County Community College District cybersecurity programs. Currently, Mr. Campbell serves as a member of the University of Memphis Center for Information Assurance Team. I will now turn the controls over to Terrence to begin the webcast. Terrence, it's all yours.
Well, thank you everybody for attending. Does everybody see my presentation?
Yep, you're loud and clear and we can see the screen.
You can see the screen? Okay, so I'm just trying to make sure I'm advancing.
Right?
Okay.
Yeah, there you go. Now it's advancing.
There we go. Yeah, just making sure on a new computer. So thank you, Doctor, for giving me an introduction. So I'll just kind of breeze through the this slide, my introduction slide, and go to the agenda. And so today, as Dr. Toby has said, that we've gone through a process of developing different foci or different types of curriculum as part of a grant that the National CyberWatch Center has. And so we've got some learning goals, objectives, there's a concept map and hierarchy, and we actually have some learning pathways for that. And so with respect to today's topic, the two learning objectives that align with today's topic are understanding the alignment of the cybersecurity function for organizations with their goals and the organizational mission, as well as understanding how cybersecurity as a function fits within the organization's change management, infrastructure, process, policies, and procedures. And so the instructional components that we have looked at in the context of helping organizations develop enterprise-wide hardening strategies, we have some declarative knowledge components, being that what are those specific terminology, what is the jargon associated with enterprise hardening strategies, what are some procedural kinds of things, or how does enterprise infrastructure hardening fall within some common frameworks, whether that's the SDLC, whether it's a systems or software, or some of the proprietary processes and frameworks that businesses use? What are the conditions and situations in which companies need to not only look at hardening their infrastructure pre-breaches as well as post-breaches, with the thought that how does incident handling also play a part or play a role in that? Looking at developing some of those skills, how do we have individuals using scripted labs, whether those labs are actual going out using virtual or software-defined networks? Are we using e-learning platforms? Are there actual tabletop exercises that we can use or develop to look at specific skills? And then the ability development in terms of, so now we've got these practice labs with actually putting them in non-scripted environments to include things like capture the flag type activities where they are given a certain amount of time where either they work as individuals or teams to try to mitigate any kind of breaches or actually try to set up a strategy and see what happens given different scenarios. And then we're looking at different kinds of assessments because we're looking at more of a competency-based framework. Those assessments are more question-driven in terms of what do we need them to know, what do we need them to do, and in terms of them knowing it and doing it, how confident are they telling us that they are with respect to the answer they're providing within those assessments, so that we can continuously tweak the curriculum to make sure that we're getting them closer to the 90 and 100 percentile than they previously were. And so as we look at organizational resilience, one of the things that continues to show up in breach reports are the fact that, or facts or things leading to more of a human performance technology approaches needs to be integrated into organizational resilience or infrastructure hardening strategies. And that's just looking at making sure that everything that we're doing to include not just our employees, but those contractors, everything that they're doing positively impacts the company's ability to withstand change within as well as outside of their environment. If any kind of policies, regulatory changes are happening, and they're happening constantly, how are we making sure that our employees and those contractors that we consistently use are not only getting that training, but we know that they're constantly, from the actions that they are performing, those behaviors that they're engaging in daily do help to consistently harden our infrastructure. And so as resilience and from a HPT or human performance technology perspective, it looks at it as an ability that must be developed. We do need to make sure that we have a culture that allows for the culture, the ability, and the motivation for that performance. Because from the HPT perspective, organizations aren't the things that change, it's the people that change. And by so taking that stance, we have to make sure that their performance is always ensuring that the infrastructure as is hardened as best as it possibly can be. And so part of that hardening, we have to look at threats, assets, and vulnerabilities. And many times within the security equation or hardening that infrastructure, we only really focus on the bits and bytes side of the house. So the servers, the devices, and most of the things, anything that focuses on the IT side of the house, we're not looking at those threats or vulnerabilities typically in the context of non-IT assets. And we have to more so look at that if we're going to be looking at that culture, or we're saying culture is a function of performance, then at some point we need to really have more conversations and more actively engage the HR department in that context of culture, and looking at saying they are an asset, the people, the property, the information that we have, to include, unplanned downtime. Downtime does not have to be a bad thing, but when it's unplanned, what is the ripple effect of that? What is the business impact of that? And so what are those actions that can result in unplanned downtime? Those things that we had not planned for, could not plan for. I'm sure everybody here has been in a situation or have a friend that in the context of unplanned downtime during adverse weather conditions have lost power. And so how do we prepare for that? Are myriad of different ways in terms of us as our individual families based on the resources that we have. And so based upon those resources that businesses have, to include the culture, how does a business really prepare itself for those unplanned times in a manner that allows them to still provide a high level of service? And then looking at those risks, what is the likelihood of losing power in adverse situations for us as individuals, but then also as a company? What is the likelihood of one of our contractors, clicking on an email that lets loose the ransomware virus within our organization? And so given, a nice segue into a case study, and that being one of the resources when we talked about the practice labs, we're looking at putting together more case study type scenarios to include tabletop exercises to help individuals understand how to better include the non-IT functions into the cybersecurity hardening strategies. And as we've seen across many different reports, they're saying security awareness training could have helped. Backup systems could have helped. Virtual standby capacity could have helped. But it's one thing to say that, it's a whole other thing to actually go through the process of putting together a comprehensive cybersecurity awareness training. But then there's also, how do you know how effective it is, and developing strategies for making it more impactful organization-wide, not just looking at the IT department, not just looking at the vendors and the employees that service that department. And so just as a quick quiz for this kind of course that we're looking to put together, is going back to looking at it more holistically. Which of these 12 categories do you think involve employees more so than IT functions or traditional bits and bytes functions, servers, devices, software, in this list, and why? Which ones do you think that you would pick out of these 12, and why? As an example of an exercise that we would have in this course. And so looking at the first 7, we can see that they have more of a employee/contractor feel to them than the rest of them, -8 forces of nature. But then it would be, okay, you selected them, but why do you think that these are more dependent on employees or contractors than the others? Would be this exercise, and it might be an icebreaker type exercise, and then the discussion that follows would help to tease out what they're getting, what they're not getting. So we have some questions, Doc. Are we going to wait for all the questions, or what's going on in the chat room?
Yeah, let's go ahead and work our way through, so we keep the presentations roughly, you know, to the assigned time, and then we'll do each of the questions in turn.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure. And so the National Institute of Standards and Technology has a couple of resources that aren't often talked about, used in tandem. They're talked about being used separately, and some of the conversations that we've had over the past year, and actually a conversation that was held over the past week in one of the NICE work groups, actually hinted towards we need to, or not hinted towards, actually talked about how do we focus on more of the human experience in the context of cybersecurity and resilience. And so having that conversation, you know, what resources can we use? We do need to look at enhancing our current awareness with respect to cyber threats, risks, and vulnerabilities. Then we need to figure out how do we actually use the tools to augment current capabilities, but also doing it in a manner that more routinely engages everyone at the operational level to mitigate either of those. And so what I say by the operational level, there is the information systems pyramid, and at the very bottom of that pyramid is the operational level. So that's collecting the day-to-day data across the organization in the context of threats, risk, and vulnerabilities, and then being able to that next level, being the tactical level. Okay, how do we develop strategies that help us to more purposefully, more holistically mitigate those threats in a manner that integrates the human experience? And those two tools that they have are the NICE framework as well as the Cybersecurity Risk Management Framework. And so as we look at the NICE framework, or the National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education Framework, it has 7 specialty areas. But one of the things that we need to do, and we're looking at, again, things from a human performance technology perspective, we need to put in some accountability in terms of making sure that we have policies and procedures in place that try to more purposefully account for the human experience in cybersecurity. But just having those policies and procedures without having some kind of accountability, or said another way, if we're not going to inspect what we expect, then it's just another policy and procedure. And part of that piece is putting in governance. And so govern and oversee is that area of the NICE framework, which helps us to establish a formal governing body within the organization that's not just inclusive of IT, it includes HR and the other functional areas in the business, to say, hey, how does the human experience impact how all of the other organizational pieces should be functioning to ensure that our infrastructure is as hardened as it possibly can. And then we're just providing this picture here so you can actually see not just the 7 areas, but also the govern and oversee or oversee and govern area in terms of what its functional subcategories are, as well as a list of some of the professional roles that are under those subcategories. And I'm not sure if anybody who's on the call is familiar with actually being able to go to the NICE area and the NIST website. There are actually knowledge, skills, and abilities that have actually been vetted for each of these roles within the organization. And so as part of this case study that we're looking at, we're considering showing a couple of different organizations that have full roles represented within their organizational chart, all the way down to, you know, the small organization that may not even have a IT department or have an information systems and security operation. So how does an organization that does not have that, what does that look like in terms of outsourcing that type of service? Because cybersecurity is not just for the multinationals. It is for those small community-based organizations that we have that are providing services to the residents every day, to include some of the small to medium-sized foundations that in our conversations over the past year, they never really looked at themselves as having to worry about cybersecurity. Or from a healthcare perspective, the small clinics and clinicians, they've not thought about cybersecurity, but it's everybody's business. And we need to be able to provide a broad range of case studies, as well as a broad range of opportunities for the students, because according to the national, the NICE K-12 subgroup and apprentice group, we are going to be experiencing a shortfall of about 1.8 million cybersecurity professionals within the next 2 years. So one of the things that we also have thought about in the context of the human experience is, how is HR compromising the cyber infrastructure in the context of the types of position calls that they're pushing out, or the call for the career opportunities that they are placing in different kinds of venues. You know, here's an example of a placement, not a job placement, a call for careers that we saw in a local paper. I've also seen something like this in LinkedIn and on Facebook as well. How do we communicate these kinds of potential let me say it this way. How do we communicate that these types of communications potentially put the company at risk? And other similar types of communications that are coming from different departments being pushed in public venues, as well as internal communications to employees, to vendors of similar nature that aren't necessarily being kept on emails. Folks may be printing things out like this, taking them home. How do we create different kind of case studies, worksheets, scenarios that are helping not just the students, but the business understand how they compromise their enterprise infrastructure? And so, as we've said before, having students look at exercises in terms of the organizational charts, what metrics need to be tied to each of these positions, not just on the bits and bytes side of the house, but the human experience side of the house. And at the end of the day, how are we looking at the training quarterly and annually in the context of goals for those organizations that span states and regions and continents? We need to be able to apply that strategy that way. Are there any kind of regulations that prevent us from doing that? An example of that is Facebook, based on European laws, is facing some serious fines on data usage. How could that have been integrated into the hardening strategy? Or should it have been? And where? And what were those triggers or red flags that could have stopped that? Or at least minimize the damage to the organization, which then means we got to look at stuff as well as not just internal, but external in terms of public relations. How has that compromised their infrastructure? And so, aside from the NICE framework, we also have what's known as the Cybersecurity Risk Management Framework. And so that actually has 5 different areas, but before you can go through those other 5 areas, we need to definitely identify what our current situation is. And so identify is highlighted here, and identify has 6 different areas. And in thinking about those areas in the context of the human experience, there's that asset mapping. And asset mapping, when we think about it, definitely the physical devices, definitely the hardware, but looking definitely at that third one, which is the organizational communication and data flows. How does that work within the organization? Where are the breakdowns that should be there between IT, HR, and the other functional departments? Who's responsible for that? How do we know that each employee understands and each department knows? What are those other systems that are connecting to our organization? In the automotive industry, you've got EDI transfers that go on that have to be secure. What are some things in terms of the human experience that can compromise those communications on either side of the house? 5 is resources. And while it only says hardware, devices, and data software, what else do we need to make sure that we have security around? And then definitely those roles and responsibilities in terms of going back to the NICE framework and looking at oversee and govern. What are those positions that we need to have? And so here's an exercise that we're thinking we need. What are 3 questions that we should make sure, or will help to make sure that that culture we have focuses on the daily performance of employees and contractors, positively impacting the resilience of the organization. The business environment. Okay, we've looked at the assets, but now looking at the business environment, which one critical piece we need to really be thinking about is, what does that supply chain for information and the roles look like internally and externally? Are there certain things in our sector from a policy and procedure perspective that that forcing us to think differently? The automotive industry, for an example, is developing some new security policies and practices to make sure that their vehicles are a lot more secure, given some of the recent breaches or ways to breach intelligent vehicles that we've seen. How does that impact the way that our business environment looks in the context of hardening our infrastructure to include the human experience? And again, what are those three critical questions that we need to be asking ourselves in the context of the business environment that tie back to the assets? The governance piece. Who sits on, who makes up this governing body? How regularly do they meet? What are some outcomes and outputs that are very tangible? How aware are they in terms of their department and the organization overall with respect to legal and regulatory requirements? How does that impact the job functions of people within their department? And how do they contribute to the overall risk management strategy? The foci of this area. And again, going back to the case study scenario, going back to exercises that we're engaging students in, we do want them to identify questions, as well as having industry experts part of this, like yourselves, helping us figure this out, making it not necessarily just paper and pencil, but more of an interactive tabletop exercise. Risk assessment. What are those things within the risk assessment area, focusing again on the human experience, that'll help the organization better understand its risks across the enterprise? How are their current policies putting them at risk? What are some threats that are known, unknown, or possibly not being used today that put them at risk? And saying again, what are those three questions? What are the three types of activities that we can have them go through in terms of risk management framework? There are certain types of exercises, certain types of data that need to be collected in the context of meeting certain regulatory standards, quality standards, things of that nature. How can we develop exercises focused on questions that make the preparation for those quality types of awards that vendors have got to have within the supply chain, so that rather than a 90-day window every year is the only time they focus on trying to gather that data and all that, but it's just part of what they do day to day. One of the things I hated doing in the automotive industry when working for Johnson Controls, they only focused on getting those QS 9000 metrics, the data collected, that report done, only a specific 90-day window every year. And it's like we go through this process every year. Everybody's stressed out, morale's low, why don't we just integrate that into what we do daily, and then we can push those resources or allocate those resources towards something different. And now, based on the information that we have from those other areas, we can really start saying, okay, what does this risk management strategy need to look like? Doing now the business impact analysis really starts to play a role or become important. Now, when we talk about business continuity planning to include disaster recovery, we've got the meat to really understand what our level of risk really is. And how long can we be without power, be without data, be without people, reports, all those other kinds of things that support the operation before we are looking at a scenario where we've got to go out of business. And having a body that actually is looking at these kinds of things on a regular basis. What does that look like? How often does it need to happen? Which reports actually help us drive those kinds of things? What happens when we don't have the data, the reports that we need to substantiate what our risk tolerance really is or really was for this particular department, for this particular strategic business unit? And while it is a combination of, well, it is a workshop, or worksheets, I'm sorry, what are those interactive exercises, the practice challenges, the practice labs, the challenge labs? How do we give them more real world experience in putting these kinds of things together? Because we're seeing that it's needed. What type of certifications are tied to this type of training, or should we be tying to this kind of training? What organizations should we be tying to this training? As well as how can we get individuals that are on this call that are interested in helping to develop or further expand different aspects of this curriculum? How do we get you all more involved? And so I would say, Dr. Toby.
Yep. Great. Well, Darren, thank you very much.
I'll pan this off to you.
Yeah, thank you very much for your presentation. Now's the time we have set aside to address any questions or that were not asked or answered earlier. Obviously, we had some comments in there in the chat, but so if you would like to post a question, you can please add it to the chat. You may also, we have a limited number of people on the call, so feel free if you'd like to just unmute yourself and ask your question. Before we jump into the Q&A period, though, I noticed we had a number of folks that had come in via phone, and therefore the names weren't registered. If you don't mind, I would like to at least be able to log who has attended today. So I have a phone number 704-906. Whoever that is, if you could unmute yourself and just let me know who you are.
Sure. This is Juan Flowers from Bank of America.
Great. Thank you, Juan. Appreciate you joining us today. And the next person I have was 810-858. If you could unmute yourself and just let us know who you are.
Taylor, and Flint.
Very good. Thank you so much for joining us today. All right, very good. Well, as I mentioned, we'd like to open the floor, so to speak, to questions. And so please feel free to post those in the group chat. While you're contemplating those, I have a question or two I'd like to ask Terrence myself. So my first question for you, Terrence, is how might those listening to this webcast today apply the lessons learned that you've gained from the challenges and successes in developing the curriculum process that you talked to us about today so far? And what are 2 or 3 next steps that you'd suggest they might take to both apply these lessons to their instructional environments and to get involved in helping you with furthering them?
Well, so I would answer both questions not trying to be, how do I want to say, cliche in terms of the slide, but email us at info@nationalcyberwatch.org. And so the second question so we can get you involved, get you on the list of I don't know how to say, get you in we've got a database of professionals that we meet with, I want to say weekly, in the context of using Google Plus groups, and we've got some other kinds of technologies that will allow you to not only have conversations with the broader group of myself, so that we're sharing the information broadly to individuals in one location. And then I think some next steps would be, if anybody is interested in being part of the identity curriculum group, so that in the context of helping us identify just what kind of resources we need in terms of practice challenges, challenge labs, worksheets, lesson plans. But then also, one of the things that we're talking about is how do we get the training down to the teachers, and not just the high school teachers, middle school and elementary teachers. There are some fundamental concepts across all of the areas that we are challenged with developing curriculum for, that we need to make sure we're engaging not just students, but parents as quickly and as often as we can.
Thank you, Terrence. We have a couple questions that have been posted in the chat. The first is, what is your target audience for the curriculum, and how do you see it fitting into K-12 career preparation? And are you looking for partners? So 3 questions.
So I'll answer the last question first. Yes, we are always looking for partners. And again, if yourself or you know of anybody that would be very interested in helping us out, please give them that email address. If there are organizations that we need to contact or that would be interested in having some discussions about being collaborative partners, please do the same, or send me an email. There were some individuals that did send me an email today in terms of whether they're going to be there today or whether they were going to be there on Friday. Please do that. Our target audience, or at this time, we are looking at college students, but we do understand that we need to open that pipeline as wide as we can, so any individuals in the context of the curriculum that are interested in becoming cybersecurity professionals would potentially be a population that we're looking at. Because college, you can either go down or you can go up in terms of what we looked at in terms of post-secondary opportunities is probably the better way to say it. And what was the other question, Toby?
So the target audience, and then how you see it fitting into K-12 career preparation.
And so in K-12 career preparation, one of the things that we've done here, and when I say here at the University of Memphis, we've piloted some boot camps, which are usually a week long. And what do we mean by a week long? So it's Monday through Friday, with Monday through Thursday being different thematic areas. And on Fridays, we've had them engage in a variety of different kinds of capture the flag activities that have ranged from playing some cybersecurity games using PBS's Nova Lab to more interactive games like Agent Surefire. We've got a web-based platform where we're able to develop our own kind of capture the flag activities. And so most recently, what that has evolved into is we are expanding the camp to supplement some of the curriculum for a high school's cybersecurity program here in Memphis. One of the very cool things that Tennessee has is that the U.S. Cyber Patriot program is a program that's actually approved to be part of the cybersecurity CTE curriculum. So we're integrating or expanding the camp to supplement that curriculum in a manner that prepares the students for the first year industry certification that they are being prepared for or should be prepared to take. And that's at this time is CompTIA's IT fundamentals. And so we're looking at probably using more of a CTF or a digital game-based learning approach to prepare them for the exams and actually doing the research behind it to see what that impact has really been for preparing them for that, to include some service learning opportunities, actually having the students go out and actually practically apply the fundamental, some of the fundamental skills of the Cybersecurity Risk Management Framework to at least do fundamental needs assessments for community-based organizations.
Terrific. All right, one last question, then we'll close down for the day, unless anyone has any, and that is, how would the questions that you asked in your presentation fit into a competency-based assessment? I mean, how might you go about doing that?
Okay, so what we have discussed, not just in terms of these questions, but questions like that broadly across the curriculum, is looking at best practices that align with those questions, but then having the students, when they answer the questions, they would have, so in an ABC scenario, giving them that format for each of the three questions, ABCD scenario, we would ask them to answer or give their answer, say as an A, but then we would also ask them to rate their level of confidence based upon, their level and confidence of answering that question. So on a Likert scale, in terms of that level of confidence, would it be a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5? And so we would hope that based upon the interaction that they have, whether it's facilitated discussion, whether it's the worksheets, whether it is a project or some combination of all of those, that when they answer each of those questions, they're closer to the 4 or 5, which then helps us understand how effective the delivery of the material is. Does that help answer that question better?
Yeah, sure does. That's great. Well, again, I'd like to thank you today for a great presentation. And again, thank everyone for attending. We hope that you'll join us in future sessions. I posted in the chat some other ways in which you can get involved. As Terrence said, you can always email us at info@nationalcyberwatch.org. And we will be posting a recording of this session as well online. If you'd like to review it again, it will be posted up on our website in a week or two time. So again, thank you for attending today's session, and please keep apprised of of new announcements. We'll be holding a session again first Wednesday and Friday of each month. So the next one will be the first Wednesday and Friday of August. Or actually, I guess it's the second Wednesday and Friday. Sorry. Second Wednesday and Friday of August. It's the 8th and 10th or something like that. So again, we'll be sending out announcements, and thank you again for attending today's session. Have a wonderful rest of the day.